Welcome to Growthcast, Insights for B2B leaders, where we uncover the strategies, stories, and solutions driving growth for B2B leaders. I'm your host, Alex, and in each episode, we'll dive deep with industry experts on how to grow in today's competitive landscape. Today, we have Jan. Nice to have you on.
Hi, nice to be here.
Do you mind for our guests doing a brief introduction around yourself and what you do?
Not at all. Well, I'm Jan Schoenmakers, founder and CEO of HASE IGEL, which translates into Hare and Hedgehog. It's a German cloud software and AI company focused on empowering people to make faster and more successful, more precise decisions using analytic AI. Originally, I don't come from a tech background. I come from a marketing and sales background, and in long years in marketing and sales, in different roles, agency, consulting, small firms, big corporations, it always annoyed me that all the cool kids around in different functions, trading, logistics, production, get to use predictive tools, get to use AI to make better decisions, but for us marketing and sales folks, everyone tells us, face it, half of your budget is wasted. It's just the way it is. And I was like, well, I don't think it has to be that way. And that's the idea that I founded HASE and Eagle on. Of course, I had to get a great team of developers, of data scientists, etc., business analysts. But once that thing was sorted out, we made a pretty terrific development, both from a technological and from an entrepreneurial standpoint.
That's really amazing. And maybe to kick off the first question, why the name?
We just wanted a name that nobody abroad could pronounce. No. For our international operations, we got 180 clients in 7 countries. We put the name of our software, Neutrum AI, front and center, and it only has a little tagline developed by HASE and Eagle. HASE and Eagle is the company, the corporate brand, and it harks back to a German fairy tale that can be viewed as the first appraisal of predictive intelligence, because it's like a fairy tale of a hare challenging a hedgehog to a race. And of course, the hedgehog doesn't have a chance in hell because, it's small, it's slow, it's weak, but the hedgehog's pretty smart. He watches the hare and predicts which route the hare will run and which moves it'll typically make. And then he coordinates with other hedgehogs to just be present at certain touch points along the route and tell the hare, I'm there already. So the hare races, races, races. And he's like, how can this be? This small little animal, it always beats me. He doesn't even understand that he's been duped. And the hedgehog won because he understood which course his opponent will take. So that's a very early view on predictive analytics and on being smart, winning with less use of resources and calories because you understood the rules of the game rather than trying to cover all the ground yourself and run, run, run. And that's the idea the company is founded on. And we were looking for an idea that people could relate to, not just another acronym or another, ancient Greek word or something nerdy that nobody outside a pretty esoteric community would understand. We wanted, a tale that people, at least in Germany, where we started with our first clients, could relate to, and that tells them what the whole thing does in the end. Where's the benefit, and thus reduces the perceived barrier because many people, particularly in the German-speaking markets, have been quite reluctant to do anything with AI or digitalization in general because they felt, they need to get a PhD first. And we wanted to make it very approachable and fun too.
Yeah, and I think that that's the perfect story to explain why it's the benefit, right? Of this, how you get ahead of the competition by thinking more strategically, etc., as opposed to trying to do everything and rushing to do it. So I think that's a great way how the name has come about. I really like it. And
Absolutely. Like the first slogan we ever had was in the marketplace, the smarter player wins.
mm,
And I really think that this is something that the AI transformation will bring about. It's always been about brains and not just about brute force. But let's be honest, for like the, classic industrial paradigm, brute force was essential. If you want to drill for oil, if you want to build a chemical corporation, if you want to manufacture cars, you need a lot of resources. You need some political protection. You need a lot of big money. Um, if you're trying to train AI models to build smart software, to create decentralized energy systems, of course, you still need money and you still need to comply with laws and everything, but it takes much less resources and much more wits. So
Hmm.
I really think this is a transformation that makes the whole marketplace more accessible, more inclusive, because it's about ideas and it's about connecting with the right people. It's not necessarily about raising billions.
Yes,
Yes.
completely correct. I agree. And then with the business itself, you've grown massively. You've gone from just German market to international clients. What were some of the challenges while you were growing the business? Perhaps let's start at the start when no one knew you.
That's a very, very good point. That was the first challenge. Well, the very first challenge to overcome was finding the right employees for the team. Um, and we had to make some adjustments. Like from the original team, like we founded the company in 2018, I'm the only one left. We had to make quite some switches to make sure that the skills and the mindset really come together. Because if you only have one thing, it doesn't work. You need both. So it took us until about early 2020 before we had a team set up where we could really start to really deliver and really soar. Um, so that was super important, and it's sort of leading to the second point, the point you mentioned. It's like nobody knew they needed it because no solution like ours had existed before. There'd been niche solutions, like there's been some predictive stuff in, say, SEO, or some automation with a bit of machine learning in programmatic advertising, for example. But there's not really been one integrated system that looks at the whole process and optimizes the whole process to really make you plan ahead and have a better mix, have a better allocation, and systematically increase your ROI. So when we told people about that, they either wouldn't get it or they wouldn't believe us. So making it very, very easy, very explainable was one challenge. And then making it so relatable and easy to experience that people would actually give us the benefit of doubt. It's like, wait a minute, maybe they can pull it off. Maybe this thing really works. That was a big challenge. And that was also a challenge for finding the right team members, because particularly in AI development and complex software development modeling, people have been, in Germany at least, have been classically, traditionally drawn into IoT or into financials. It's been like, okay, you're an awesome modeler, you're a great developer, you know your way around neural networks, etc. So what do? Either you go into industry automation or you go into stuff like, quantified trading,
Hmm.
to convince people that in these domains that they should not pursue this path. Um, but veer off and go on a very, very weird path where you look at fuzzy variables like what do people say, what do they buy, how do they work, why do they like something, where it's not as clear cut, where it's super fuzzy, where there's less pre-trained models, where there's less experience in the industry, and really pave new ground there.
Hmm.
I had to convince them that it was worthwhile and that we could pull it off.
That
Once we
makes
had this, taken care of, once we had a great team, and once we had our first supportive clients and they had their first successes with the system, um, we made pretty good progress. The company started growing at a very nice pace. Um, but it was still hard for companies to accept that a software could be a consultant,
Yes.
that AI could give them real advice without having people reiterating it. So that was the next challenge, to sort of pull ourselves out of that game, because for the first years it was always like, yeah, I've seen it in the software, but can't you send me one or two consultants who will explain it to me again? It's like, why? It's there and it's very simple. It's like a list of three things,
Yeah.
but yes, but I want a human to read me the list because then I'm like, okay, now I got consulting. And that's something where actually the COVID pandemic removed the biggest growth barrier. We grew like crazy in 2020, and we've grown really fast from 2020 on, with over 60% per year, and
Wow.
this as a bootstrapped company, um, because in the pandemic, people were disincentive to have consultants in the office. So everyone moved to Zoom and Teams, etc. And this created a first step of digitalization. It's like, okay, if I'm not in a room with a strategy consultant holding my hand, if I only see their blurred image on a computer screen, it's not that different anymore from looking at the next computer screen to the left of it, where
Mm.
the AI gives me advice. I see a face here and I see, I don't know, a list or a chart there, but it's sort of the same process. So companies started adapting that much faster because they got used to making decisions without having all the relevant people in one room.
Fair. That's really interesting. And how did you go about, you mentioned 60% year-on-year growth. What's the business development process around that? Did you have to hire a sales team? Was it just you doing everything?
Actually, we've been pursuing a different strategy right from the start, because I always had the idea that this should be a very focused, very small company doing big business. And my partner, who joined later in early 2020, our CTO, he sees it the same way, because we both come from big corporations and we both noticed that this is definitely not what we want to do. Um, so we both had this idea that we need to grow with a very good scaling strategy that will allow us to serve 10 times the amount of clients without having to have 10 times the amount of employees, but maybe only like, twice as much employees or 50% more employees. So from the start, we focused a lot on making this scalable from a technology standpoint, from a sales standpoint, and the sales scaling is through partnerships and through upselling and a virtually non-existing churn rate. On the one hand, we built this system in a very modular fashion. So you don't, and this is a very stark contrast to the big US platforms, where normally, or also, big German or European platforms like, say, SAP, where you
Yeah,
have to purchase the whole thing for an obscene amount, even if you only use a tiny fraction of it.
yeah,
We went more, the Lego route. It's like, you buy this little set of building bricks or this little whatever, police station.
yeah,
If that's what you want, you only pay for this. And then you notice, well, it's kind of cool to play with my Lego police station, but it would be much more fun if I had a fire station too. So you're at the fire station, you have your upselling journey, but it's more accessible. And having it this flexible and this easily customizable creates an amazing customer loyalty and an amazing potential for upselling over time. There's really virtually no churn. So this is the one part. And the other part is that really from the get-go, we looked for the right partners who would sell our software to their clients. Um, if it's just on a recommendation basis or if it's on a reseller or distributor basis, but we were always looking for win-win situations, not just, oh, there's the sales office, they are distributor for 20 software companies, let's be the 21st. But we analyzed the market and we're like, okay, there's this strategy consulting firm, and they tell everyone they work differently from the others. They build their decisions on tech and on modeling. But then if you look closely, it doesn't seem they have a whole lot of tech. So we pitched our tech. We were like, guys, look, you can have our system. You can actually white label it and you can bolster your USP. Or, looking at marketing portals that do a great job in automating marketing for big retailers, for example, or big franchises, but they only automate the distribution. They don't automate the strategy. So you frequently get automated distribution with poor strategy. So we approached them, we're like, look, this would be a perfect tie-in. You can sell that to all the corporations using your portal. At the same time, you can strengthen your position in the marketplace considerably because you're not just automating the status quo, you're advancing the status quo and automating it. And this is something your competitors can't do. This is how we went about it. So very early on, we made nearly half of our sales volume with external partners who had a genuine intrinsic interest and not just the commission to sell our product to their clients or to embed it in their own systems, which scaled pretty well. Plus, once we've won a client, we've very rarely lost them, and usually the subscriptions get more and more over time, not because we increase prices every time. Of course, we increase prices too because stuff gets more expensive. Just look at how AWS, for example, raised their prices over the past couple of years. But most of all, because clients are convinced of the solution and then they bring in more use cases. They're like, okay, I've been using it in marketing. Can I also use it in CorpCom? Cool, now I'm using it in CorpCom. How about HR? And that's the main driver. So we really started building our own sales team pretty late. It was something that I did pretty much alone with two senior advisors who also pitched in. Until about 2 years ago, when we started building our own marketing and sales team and our own customer success team. So now we do much more classic sales too, to bring more firepower to the table. But the whole company is really built on upselling, on recommendations by really convinced, happy clients, and on the right partnerships with not just your run-of-the-mill distributor, but with companies who are really keen on using and reselling our software because it gives them a USP.
Yeah, that's really interesting. And so you've done the partnership model, you've mentioned the white labeling. It's quite unique business development strategies. Do you guys do any kind of, let's say, paid advertising or cold outbound, or is it more based on these partnerships and referral?
Um, well, I would draw a line here between or differentiate here between sales and marketing. Um, I would argue, okay, you can say outbound, that's more sales than marketing, and we've started doing that ever since we've built our own sales team. Of course, they're calling potential clients and they're writing emails and using LinkedIn to connect and drive around and visit companies. The classic mix of a field sales stuff. We do that and it works pretty well. Um, On the other hand, there's marketing, and the classic marketing mix or sales-oriented marketing mix, like, performance marketing, sponsorship, etc. It just doesn't work for us. We've tried it over the years several times. First, we thought, maybe our budget is just too low. Then we made more money, we invested more budget. We thought, okay, maybe we're going about it the wrong way. I mean, I come from advertising, so I think I have pretty good judgment there, but maybe I'm blind for my own company. So we gave this to pretty experienced major agencies with a lot of SaaS experience. It never worked out. Like
Mm.
enterprise SaaS systems apparently are not something that companies buy because they've seen your ad somewhere or because you've sponsored a conference that they were
Yeah.
at. It never, I mean, it's not that nothing came of it, but we never got a decent ROI. And as a very efficiency driven, lean organization, it's the only thing we look at. The only thing. Like everything we do has to have an ROI. And if something doesn't deliver, we exit. So we exit all advertising to this very day. We have a little baseline of SEA primarily on our name to make sure if people look for HASE and IGEL, they find us and not like a Wikipedia article on the fairy tale. Um, but that's pretty much it. What we do, however, and what works really well is tour the whole conference circus. We do a lot of keynotes on conferences, conventions, trade fairs. Usually not your classical booth. We do maybe 2 or 3 booths a year. Mostly we do keynotes, and we don't pay for it. We strive to be excellent keynote speakers that really give insight to the public, where that makes the organizers of events happy to have us there because they know that people will appreciate that we're not just going on stage and advertising ourselves. um, and that creates trust, and trust creates support and interest. And the same thing with PR. We do a lot of PR. We're pretty much in the newspapers every month, at least in Germany and Switzerland. Outside, it's rarer, but we're getting there. Um, and not just some tiny newspapers like the big ones, like, Business Insider or Wirtschaftswoche, Handelsblatt, uh, once or twice even Tagesschau, like the German BBC. And this is something, if we are in on TV or in a major business newspaper or given a keynote at one of the big industry conventions, we're never leaving without at least, I don't know, 4 or 5 qualified leads
Yes.
with a very high trust. So you have a really great conversion rate and you're not paying anything for it. You're investing your time. And of course, that creates opportunity cost. You need to be wise about, like, where do you speak, or with which newspapers do you work by providing, for example, um, analysis or uh, studies. But if you're going about it in a focused way and looking for synergies, it's something that takes more management and more vision than just running ads. But it yields a much, much, much higher ROI, at least for us. And it's
Mm.
something that most competitors just don't do. I mean, of course, they give keynotes. Many times, however, they just buying their way into it, and then it's fairly advertorial keynotes, and people don't necessarily like that. They pay like $1,000 or £1,000 to be at a conference, and then they go there and listen to someone giving them an advertising pitch. That's not what they came for. Um, so the whole thing of really value oriented, like customer or visitor value oriented speaking and organic media coverage is not very common in the industry.
Yes. That makes complete sense. And how do you get yourself invited to these keynotes?
On the one hand, the media coverage helps. Um, and of course, all the awards we've won. It's 16 international awards by now, including most innovative SME in the world. Um, they help because, I mean, if you're hosting an event, then you look who you want to have there. So you look, who's innovative in the space, who's trustworthy. And then if you see a company who wins all those awards and their top level staff is interviewed by the leading newspapers and gives op-eds in leading newspapers, etc., then it's something like, okay, I got to put these guys on the list. On the other hand, we are proactive about it. I have two employees actively hunting for PR opportunities and for speaking opportunities with ideas for data and for studies that we could provide to journalists. So, because I mean, no journalist wants to write about a company just advertising the company. It's not how it works. It's not how it should work either. I mean, journalists need to be independent. They are not our PR spokespeople. So you need to come up with a pitch that's truly intriguing for the journalist and their readers. And with the conference, it's the same thing. So coming up with good topics, saying like, okay, I know this editor is working on that piece. We really need to think about which data could help them make it a better piece. Or we know this conference, they're covering this and this and this topic, but there's one spot that they haven't covered yet, which is really interesting for many visitors. So you can pitch them with like, we see you haven't covered this topic yet. We know it's important for your visitors because we've got the data. Look here. We could fill that blank. So we're very proactive about that.
That's amazing. I think that's a
It's
really good
something I
approach
learned
of
when
being
I
proactive.
worked at Edelman Silicon Valley. Back when I lived in the US, I worked at Edelman, the world's biggest owner-operated PR agency, and they do a lot of, well, not lobbying, well, let's call it public affairs and investor relations too. And the junior staff, they always have the privilege of doing all those pitches because it's the footwork that
Yeah.
senior execs don't necessarily want to do. And it's super instructive because you learn a lot about how you do these things. It was my duty to like do exactly that, find out for companies like, for example, TSMC, find out which journalist works on an article where the perspective of TSMC might be of interest, or why analysts rate this company higher and that company lower, and then call them up, be like, I really think you should discuss that with the CIO of our client because he can provide some valuable data. Uh, that's where I learned this, and then I taught it to my employees because it's not necessarily rocket science, but it's pretty delicate. You can you ruin your reputation fast if you're not sensitive because then people feel like you're trying to pressure them into making them write about you, and no journalists like that, and of course no event likes that too if you're too pushy about I want to be a speaker here.
Yes. No, that's really amazing. I think that's a really good approach, especially the proactiveness, because I think a lot of business owners expect I have a great product, everyone should be coming to me. But really,
Yes,
the reality is that most people don't know you. Even if you put out content every single day
yeah.
about yourself, still most people don't know you. So you need to maximize your chances in front of the
And you
right.
need to be realistic too. I mean, we're a small we're not bootstrapped anymore. We took in an investor last year with a minority stake, so the company still belongs to our CTO and myself with a majority, but we're not bootstrapped anymore. We raised quite a nice amount of capital, but until that point, like the first 6 years, we've been bootstrapped, so we just didn't have the money to go the route of the hare, run and cover the ground with your own resources. We had to go the hedgehog route. We had to be smart and think about what we could do with having brains, but not having much money. And I think that applies to the majority of AI companies in Europe, because if you look at Stargate, it's like 500 frigging billions.
Yeah.
In Germany, it's been all over the news for weeks when Aleph Alpha raised 500 millions. That's like
Yeah.
1,000 times as much now
Yeah.
in the US. And it's similar if you look at the invest that's been flowing into companies like OpenAI or Anthropic.
Mm.
There is no way at all to beat them or even catch up with them using resource intensive ways if you're trying to like out wrestle them.
Yeah,
It's
they're
ridiculous.
receiving
It's
funding
absolutely
like the
ridiculous.
GDP of company of countries.
Yes, you need to have more focus. You need to be more specific, move even faster, have more focus, be more efficient, more energy efficient, more capital efficient, and be smarter in your marketing, sales, and growth capital raising strategies. Because going just for a full-blown attack, being like, okay, will be, I don't know, the German open AI, it is just ridiculous because you're like such a tiny fraction, you have such a tiny fraction of resources at your disposal of what they have in the US or also what they have in China, where the state funds the whole party. It just it doesn't work. You have to focus, and I think that's a good thing. I think it's a bad thing that Europe has dropped the ball on the AI arms race pretty much altogether. But it's a good thing being in a market where you can't easily out wrestle your opponent, because that teaches you to outsmart them. And thus, maybe you won't be bigger than them in terms of revenue, but you might very well be more profitable, and you might very well be more sustainable, have more customer loyalty. And I think that's the route we need to take in Europe if we realistically assess our resources in terms of capital, in terms of manpower, in terms of technology.
Yeah. No, I completely agree with all the points you just made. And then I think that's the perfect segue into what are your final thoughts or piece of advice for any leaders watching this on growing their business now in an AI world?
There's been this beautiful advertising slogan. I don't think they use it anymore, but I really liked it. Don't imitate, innovate. Um, when we started, we didn't try to build an AI that others already had and that made them successful. We tried to build something that nobody had tried to build yet. We tried to build an explainable analytic AI that can really give you the reasons for its reasoning. It's fully compliant. It can tell you, okay, based on this data and on this rationale with these models and even these calculations, I give you this recommendation or this forecast, which is something that nobody had even really attempted until we came along. And we were crazy enough to apply it to something that's not easily quantifiable, but that's very fuzzy, human behavior in the marketplace. It would have been, there was a high possibility that we would fail, that we would just not succeed, not bring it about. But we did. And I think that's really, if you're in a market as a European company in the AI market, all the easy routes are taken already. And there are incumbents that are pretty much impossible to dethrone, at least from Europe. So you need to find niches that haven't been covered, or where the incumbent's really weak. And that automatically entails risk, technological risk, business risk, because you can't just copy a template. So this would be the second piece of advice. Be bold and really take risk. I think many entrepreneurs, particularly in Germany, maybe it's a German disease. I think it's better in the UK. Um, approach entrepreneurship like they would approach a hired management position.
Yeah.
You know, they're not really risk takers. They're trying to play it safe in every direction, moving relatively slow, testing the waters first, testing them again, and then maybe tiptoeing into it rather than going the full Schumpeter road and breaking things and risking to break their own necks. Because I mean, that's where you get really high yield. If I look at the return that we've already got on the invest we made in 2018, it's staggering. And I'm not trying to brag here. I mean, let me be very clear. There's many, many companies out there who are much bigger than us, even in Germany. But you have to look at a proportion. You have to look at how much you invest and how much you made of it. That's the only thing that counts in business. Not if you make 5 billion revenue, but if you have gotten 20 times or 200 times your initial invest.
Yes.
That's what counts, even if you're smaller, because that's the leverage. And that's like the third thing I would advise, like emphasize efficiency. You know, I mean, many people seem to have forgotten about the basic rules of business just because we're in a new technologic paradigm. Look around, if it's Europe, if it's US, all the AI companies, they bleed chips. They don't make money. It's like, dude, if you have such a great product, why aren't people paying for it? It's like, why? If you need to give it away for free for anyone to use it, is it really that great? Because everybody will cheer if they get something for free. The crucial question is it a real business model? Do you really are you profitable? And if you're not profitable yet, what's your road to profitability? We've actually been profitable from the very first year. Um, and of course, it's been easier for us because we don't have an LLM, for example. We have a language model, an own language model, but it's like medium sized, which makes it exponentially more energy efficient and cheaper to train. So, of course, if you build an LLM, you have to invest upfront and you'll definitely lose a lot of money first. But you need to have a very convincing idea how you can recoup that money later and not just be like, it's going to be the best LLM and then everything else going to take care of itself. It's like, no,
Yeah.
look at VHS versus Betamax. You know, the better standard can still lose if it doesn't make money. And the fourth thing I think is don't underestimate the power of human emotions because I think many people still have a hard time approaching AI in a mature way. They're either scared of it or they're unrealistically giddy.
Yes.
Some people are using it for everything and really like for wild off-label stuff. I know companies using ChatGPT for media mix modeling or for budgeting. This is insane. It's a frigging language model. It's never been designed for those purposes. It's not truthful. It's not explainable. It's not analytic in the original sense of the word. It's a fantastic model, but it's something you just can't use it for. And then people are all over it and they use it for stuff that it's not made for, and then it doesn't work, or it doesn't work that well, and then they're like, oh, tried AI and it sucks.
Yeah.
Or they are afraid. They're like, oh, it's gonna take my job, it's gonna, ruin the democracy, whatever. Um, and it's easy as a professional in the field to dismiss those fears or those enthusiasms as naive and be arrogant about it. And I would argue that most of the industry is pretty arrogant about it. And that's a very big mistake because we need to take these emotional aspects very seriously because if we provide tools, and it's just tools in the end, we need to educate and also to emotionally guide the customers to the point where they can use these tools in the right way. If they buy our hammer and they use it to kill their neighbor, sooner or later, hammers will be prohibited or at least have a very bad reputation. So if you build a hammer, you got to teach people it's a device for putting a nail in the wall. No, you can't replace your chainsaw with it. You can't play piano with it. And it's like, haha, they're so naive, they're so dumb, they should just move on. It's like, no, it's your job. You're building the technology. You have to really make people think and feel about it in a way that empowers them to use it correctly. And as it's mostly nerds creating tech, they're not particularly empathetic.
Hmm. Completely agree with you. I think that's the best way to round off today's episode with your final 4 points. I hope the audience has taken at least one of them on board and they can implement into their business. But thanks so much for being a guest today, Jan, and really appreciate you sharing your knowledge and how you've grown your business today. So that was today's episode of Growthcast. See you guys next time, and thank you, Jan, for being a guest today.
Thank you, Alex. It was a pleasure to be here.
Thank you. Have a good one.